Atlantis, the city drowned not just by the sea, but by fear, a civilization so powerful the church buried its memory deeper than the ocean itself. The threat was not in the story, but in the memory. Somewhere beneath centuries of prayer and doctrine lies proof that paradise was built, not promised. That divine power was earned, not given. That humanity once touched heaven without permission, and the flood that followed was not judgment, but competition. What if two floods meant only one truth could survive? This is the truth behind Atlantis and the power it threatened. Welcome to ancient Underworld, where gods fall, monsters rise, and devils whisper through the shadows of forgotten myths. If you enjoy exploring the dark side of mythology, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another forgotten tale. When Plato wrote the dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he claimed he was not inventing, but translating. Whispers from Egyptian priests who spoke of a civilization 9,000 years dead, where Poseidon's blood flowed through mortal veins, where temples rose not to worship gods, but to channel them. Atlantis, the perfect pagan empire, where divine right came not from above, but from within, where kings were philosophers and priests were scientists, where the sacred geometry of creation bent to human will. But what kind of power could make the earth itself tremble with obedience? Concentric rings of land and water, carved with precision that made the pyramids look crude. A civilization that was built with light, that sang with crystals, that commanded the elements themselves. The Atlanteans did not pray for miracles, they engineered them. Stone obeyed their voice, water bent to their will, and light became their servant. Their understanding of consciousness unlocked abilities that modern science still cannot explain. They had become what every religion promised its followers could become, yet without worship, submission, or salvation. Then came the deluge. In a single day and night, the greatest empire Earth had ever known vanished beneath waves that swallowed light itself. Divine punishment, Plato called it. But punishment for what? For building too high, for knowing too much, for proving that mortals could become gods without heaven's permission. And here lies the seed of terror that would haunt Christianity for millennia. Because two floods, two chosen peoples, two ways of understanding divine wrath could never coexist in human memory. Two competing floods meant two competing truths, and only one could survive. Noah's flood punished sin and saved the faithful through obedience, through covenant, through submission. But Atlantis drowned not for moral failing, but for transcendence, for becoming too much like gods themselves. And this the church could never allow, because if divine punishment could fall upon the virtuous, upon the advanced, upon those who had unlocked creation's deepest secrets, then what did salvation even mean? St. Augustine trembled when he read Timaeus, not from wonder but from recognition. He saw in Atlantis everything Christianity was built to replace. The idea that humanity could perfect itself, that divine knowledge could be earned, not given, that paradise could be built, not promised. Origen dismissed it as allegory, Aquinas called it Platonic fancy. However, their urgency, their desperate need to explain away what Plato had recorded, betrayed their deepest fear. What if the pagans had been right all along? The early church fathers understood the true danger. Atlantis represented a civilization that had achieved divine power through human effort alone. No prophets, no scripture, no divine revelation required. Just knowledge, will, and the understanding that consciousness itself was the key to reshaping reality. Therefore, if such a place had truly existed, it meant humanity needed no savior, no intermediary, no church. The church fathers rewrote history with surgical precision. They took Plato's advanced technology and rebranded it as demonic magic. Divine bloodline became satanic corruption. Historical fact became cautionary fiction. The flood shifted from cosmic accident to moral necessity. And slowly, carefully, the church builds its counter-narrative, one where only their flood matters, only their salvation saves. Because if Atlantis had existed, if such power could be achieved through human effort, then every cathedral was built on lies, every priest held empty authority, every promise of heaven rang hollow, These forbidden histories hold keys the church never wanted found. If you're ready to unlock what they tried to seal forever, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because some truths are too dangerous to face alone. The church thought they had won, but memory bleeds through even the strongest seals. In hidden chambers beneath European cities, initiates gather to whisper of the lost wisdom. The Rosicrucians claimed descent from Atlantean survivors. The Freemasons built their temples on geometric principles that echoed the sunken city. And always they spoke of rebuilding what the church had worked so hard to erase. Why did these secret societies risk everything to preserve fragments of a myth? Because they knew it was never a myth at all. The Renaissance unleashed scholars who carried dangerous fragments. Renaissance rebels like John Dee, Giordano Bruno, and Paracelsus risked everything to preserve fragments of Atlantean fire. Dee claimed angels taught him Enochian. Bruno died for teaching that infinite worlds meant infinite possibilities. Paracelsus mapped the body as a living temple. All carried fragments of what the church called heresy, but what they recognized as an echo. Additionally, these men discovered something that terrified the church more than any demon: blueprints. Hidden within their research were traces of Atlantean methods, ways to harness consciousness as a tool, techniques for bending reality through focused will and geometric precision. Not magic as the church defined it, but technology so advanced it appeared supernatural. The Hermeticists decoded Atlantis as the age when humans wielded the prima materia, the first matter from which all creation springs, when consciousness itself could reshape reality through will and knowledge combined. And the Church Inquisition moved swiftly against any who spoke too openly of the lost arts, who claimed too loudly that Eden could be rebuilt, who suggested too boldly that salvation could be earned rather than given. In every alchemist's laboratory, in every attempt to unlock nature's deeper patterns, they heard the whisper of Atlantean ambition, the pride that had once shaken heaven itself, and they knew that some knowledge was too dangerous for humanity to remember. Nevertheless, the knowledge survived, passed down through bloodlines and secret texts, waiting for the day when humanity would be ready to remember what it once was. The church had won the battle for official history, but the war for human consciousness continued in shadows, in symbols, in the spaces between prayers where forbidden truths still echoed. The church worked tirelessly to erase Atlantis from official history, but memory is stubborn. Stories have a way of resurfacing in unexpected places, like fragments of a song carried by the wind. Even while bishops denounced Plato as allegory and priests burned pagan manuscripts, Atlantis appeared in frescoes, in whispered legends, in the coded language of scholars who refused to forget. Why did memory cling so fiercely to this drowned city? Because Atlantis was not just a tale, it was a template, a reminder that human civilization could reach divine heights without kneeling to heaven. And even when stripped from the pulpit, it survived in art, architecture, and secretive societies that saw in Plato's account not fiction, but blueprint. Cathedrals built during the Gothic era, with their soaring arches and mathematical precision, carried echoes of Atlantean design. Not that the church would admit it, but many Masons studied geometry that mirrored Plato's descriptions of concentric perfection. To the faithful, they were temples to God. To initiates, they were stone testimonies that knowledge survives even when names are erased. Meanwhile, across Europe, myths of drowned lands multiplied. Celtic tales of Wise, Breton legends of Kyrgyz, and even whispers of Avalon all echoed the Atlantean catastrophe. To the church, these were dangerous reverberations, because every retelling reminded people that perhaps Eden was not the only paradise, and perhaps divine favor was not the only path to greatness. Memory, once awakened, cannot be buried completely. That was the problem. Atlantis represented a persistent counter-history, a narrative of human self-sufficiency that slipped through the cracks of dogma, waiting to resurface when the world was ready to listen again. If the church could not destroy memory outright, it could weaponize interpretation. And so began a centuries-long war on symbols, the slow transformation of Atlantean echoes into marks of heresy. The geometric principles of Atlantis, recast as tools of witchcraft, the crystalline technologies whispered in hermetic texts, rebranded as satanic illusions. Even the idea of harnessing consciousness to shape matter was condemned, not because it was false, but because it was far too close to truths the Church feared. This war on symbols reached its height during the Inquisition. Every alchemist's laboratory, every astronomer's map, every healer's charm was scrutinized for traces of forbidden knowledge. Yet beneath the accusations of sorcery lay an unspoken anxiety. What if these seekers were rediscovering fragments of Atlantis? What if the drowned city's legacy was stirring again? It is here we see the full scope of the Church's fear. They were not fighting witches and heretics. They were fighting memory itself, the persistence of a story too dangerous to remain in the human imagination. By redefining knowledge as sorcery, by branding geometry as demonic, they sought to smother the Atlantean inheritance once and for all. But suppression has a paradoxical effect. It often makes the forbidden more alluring. Secret societies began to adopt Atlantean symbols precisely because they were feared. The compass and square, the concentric rings, the temple blueprint, all became silent challenges to church authority. Atlantis survived, not in open sermons, but in the hidden language of initiation. And if you followed us this far, you know exactly why this matters. The fear of Atlantis wasn't about a city. It was about what Atlantis proved humanity could achieve without divine permission. If you're ready to keep unearthing what they tried to bury, hit subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Because the deeper we go, the more dangerous the truth becomes. By the Renaissance, the Church faced a new enemy, curiosity armed with evidence. For centuries, Atlantis had been whispered in hidden chambers, encoded in symbols, dismissed as myth. But with the rise of humanist scholarship, explorers, and natural philosophers, the drowned city began to re-emerge, not just as allegory, but as history. When explorers crossed the Atlantic and found civilizations in the New World with advanced architecture, astronomy, and mathematics, some whispered that these were descendants of Atlantis. The Church moved quickly to frame them as pagans in need of salvation, but the parallels were too striking to ignore. Temples aligned with solstices, cities built on geometric principles, knowledge of the stars rivaling Europe's finest minds. Was Atlantis resurfacing in the Americas, a memory carried by survivors across oceans? At the same time, scientists like Francis Bacon revived Platonic ideals of knowledge. Bacon's New Atlantis painted a vision of society built on discovery rather than revelation, experimentation rather than dogma. To the Church, this was more than fiction. It was sedition, a call to rebuild the drowned city in spirit, if not in stone. The deeper science pushed into nature's secrets, the more the Church heard echoes of Atlantean pride. Telescopes revealing the heavens, microscopes unveiling hidden worlds, mathematical precision applied to architecture and engineering. All of it felt like humanity grasping again at godlike powers. And behind it all loomed the ghost of Atlantis, the reminder that humanity had once walked this path before. The Church's fear shifted from memory to momentum. What if the drowned city was not a warning, but a prophecy? What if humanity, left unchecked, would rise again to the heights that had once defied heaven? Each discovery became more than progress. It became a threat to the monopoly of salvation. Atlantis had become not just a memory, but a shadow chasing the future. What made Atlantis so threatening to the Church was not just its architecture or its technology, but its approach to consciousness itself. While Christian theology framed the mind as a vessel to be disciplined and purified, the Atlanteans seemed to view consciousness as the very engine of creation. Plato hinted at it, but later Hermeticists spelled it out more clearly. The Atlanteans had discovered that thought could shape matter, intention could bend probability, and collective focus could shift the physical world. This wasn't prayer in the sense the Church demanded, supplication to an external deity. It was a participatory science, a recognition that human beings carried a spark of the creative force within themselves. Imagine what this meant. No priesthood required to mediate between mortals and God, no hierarchy standing between humanity and the divine. Each individual was, in essence, a fragment of the Creator, capable of building, destroying, and reshaping the world through alignment of will and understanding. The Church labeled such ideas heresy for good reason. If humanity truly possessed the capacity to create miracles without intercession, then every cathedral, every sacrament, every priestly authority became obsolete. Why tithe to an institution if paradise could be built here and now through knowledge and intention? Traces of this consciousness science trickled into later traditions. Alchemists spoke of the prima materia not merely as a substance, but as the malleable essence of reality itself. Kabbalists explored the creative power of language, believing that sacred combinations of letters mirrored Atlantean techniques for resonating with creation. Even modern fields such as quantum physics, with its emphasis on observation shaping outcome, echo whispers of the same truth. Consciousness is not passive, it is casual. And here lies the true danger. If Atlantis had proved that humanity could wield divine power directly, then the Church's monopoly on salvation was forever in jeopardy. The flood may have destroyed their temples, but the knowledge survived in fragments, resurfacing in every age where seekers dared to believe the mind itself was divine technology. This was not mythology, it was memory, and memory was far harder to drown than stone. If Atlantis was destroyed, why did its memory persist so stubbornly? The answer lies in those who claim descent from its survivors. Across the ancient world, scattered legends tell of culture bringers, figures who arrived from the sea after cataclysm, carrying knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, medicine, and architecture. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, the god of wisdom, often depicted as arriving with knowledge from a lost age. The Mayans revered Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who emerged from the waters to teach civilization. The Sumerians told of Oans, a fish-like sage who rose from the sea each day to instruct humanity in writing and law. Different names, different myths, but all eerily aligned. Survivors of a drowned civilization bringing fragments of forgotten science to rebuild the world. Secret societies in later centuries adopted these myths as their origin stories. The Rosicrucians claimed to guard wisdom that had survived a great cataclysm. The Freemasons saw themselves as inheritors of Atlantean architecture. Even the Knights Templar, in their relentless quest for lost relics and hidden knowledge, were accused of guarding fragments of the drowned city's inheritance. The Church's suspicion of these groups was not paranoia, it was recognition. Behind the symbols, behind the rituals, behind the coded language of secrecy, the same Atlantean whisper persisted, that humanity once stood as gods and could do so again. Persecution followed, as it always did. Secret orders were branded heretical, their texts burned, their members executed. But as with Atlantis itself, destruction only spread the myth further. The guardians of the secret ensured that even if cities fell, even if libraries burned, fragments of Atlantean knowledge would outlast both empire and church. Because some truths are too dangerous to kill. The greatest fear of the Church was not that Atlantis had existed, but that it might rise again. Not literally from the ocean floor, but within human civilization. Every leap in knowledge brought whispers of its return. During the Enlightenment, as reason displaced dogma, thinkers invoked Atlantis as a symbol of humanity's true potential. During the Age of Exploration, when new worlds and lost cities were discovered, many believed Atlantis lay just beyond the horizon, waiting to be found. In the modern era, as science uncovers the hidden powers of energy, consciousness, and quantum mechanics, the parallels grow unavoidable. What if Atlantis was not simply a lost past, but a future still ahead of us? The Church feared this possibility most of all, that humanity, left unbound by fear, would once again discover the same principles. Consciousness as power, geometry as technology, energy as divine inheritance. A second Atlantis, not drowned but built deliberately, could forever end the monopoly of salvation. Humanity would need no mediators, no gatekeepers, no promised lands. Paradise could be engineered. Even today, the myth endures because it strikes at something primal, a memory encoded in our collective unconscious, a whisper that we once stood taller, built greater, dreamed bolder, that we are more than fallen sinners awaiting redemption. We are builders of worlds, shapers of reality, inheritors of a forgotten throne. And if that memory returns, if humanity rediscovers what was once lost, then no flood, physical or theological, will be enough to drown it again. Atlantis is always spoken of as a past, a city drowned, a myth lost, a memory buried. But what if the true reason the church feared it was because Atlantis was not a past, but a future? A mirror held up to humanity's destiny, showing not what we were, but what we are becoming again. Think about it. Every leap humanity makes in science echoes the same patterns described in Plato's dialogues and preserved in forbidden traditions. The Atlanteans commanded energy, light, and vibration. Today, we harness electricity, split atoms, bend light through fiber optics, and map consciousness with brain scanners. They engineered miracles with crystals. We do the same with silicon chips and lasers. The Atlanteans built concentric cities aligned with the stars. We launch satellites to track cosmic alignments and build machines capable of recreating the conditions of the Big Bang itself. The line between magic and science has always been one of perspective. What was once miracle is now technology. What was once heresy is now physics. But if the Atlanteans had indeed reached this threshold, then their story is not just a myth, it is a warning. The Church always feared knowledge that bypassed its authority. In the medieval era, it was astronomy that challenged doctrine. In the Enlightenment, it was reason that displaced theology. Today, it is quantum science and artificial intelligence. Each new discovery carries the same whisper. Humanity is capable of becoming what religion always promised, but without priests, without cathedrals, without intermediaries. Now ask yourself, why does the myth of Atlantis still inspire fear, not just wonder? Because it suggests that this has all happened before, that we have stood at the edge of godhood once already, and the flood was not a random disaster, but a reset, a competition of truths. If humanity could remember its divine potential, the Church's role as gatekeeper of salvation collapses instantly. This is why, even in modern times, institutions attempt to control the narrative. Ancient discoveries are explained away as primitive superstition. Archaeological anomalies are dismissed as coincidence. Entire histories are rewritten to fit within the narrow lane of approved truth. But what if those anomalies are the fingerprints of Atlantis? What if the buried cities being discovered beneath the waves in places like the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia are not isolated mysteries, but fragments of the same drowned memory resurfacing? The fear is not that Atlantis lies beneath the sea. The fear is that Atlantis lies within us, that the same consciousness, the same capacity to bend reality, is not lost but dormant, waiting to awaken again. That each discovery in science, each breakthrough in physics or neurology, is a step toward rebuilding what was once drowned. Imagine what this means. If consciousness truly shapes reality, if thought can bend matter, if humanity can access creation itself, then salvation is no longer a gift, it is a skill. Heaven is not a reward, it is a blueprint, and religion as an institution becomes obsolete. This was always the Church's nightmare, not demons, not devils, not heresy, but the possibility that Atlantis was not myth, not past, not punishment, but prophecy. A prophecy that humanity would rediscover its divine inheritance, reclaim its lost sciences, and no longer need permission to touch eternity. And maybe that's the real reason the flood narrative was rewritten, the myth buried, the memory suppressed, because the Church could not allow humanity to realize that the city of Atlantis was never fully drowned. It still rises, not from the sea, but from the human mind. Each act of creation, each scientific breakthrough, each awakening of consciousness is another stone of the temple rebuilt. The question is not whether Atlantis will return. The question is whether we are ready for it when it does. The truth emerges from centuries of burial. Atlantis wasn't just sunken stone, it was a secret some wanted buried forever. Proof that humans could reach divine heights without divine permission, could build paradise without the promised land, could touch infinity without eternal salvation. And this the Church could never allow to be remembered, because some truths are too threatening for faith, some memories too dangerous for salvation. The Church did not fear myth, they feared memory, the kind that whispers through dreams, that echoes in the spaces between prayers, that remembers when humans walked as gods upon the earth. Every cathedral razed, every heretic burned, every book banned in the name of protecting souls. But the real protection was of power, of authority, of the monopoly on divine connection that Atlantis had proven unnecessary. What's more, that fear never ended. Even now, as science pushes closer to unlocking consciousness, as quantum physics reveals the malleable nature of reality, as technology approaches the miraculous, the ancient terror resurfaces. The fear that humanity might remember its true potential, might reclaim the power it once wielded when gods walked among mortals and mortals commanded the forces of creation. The ancient question burns through centuries of silence. Do you seek salvation, or do you seek knowledge? The Church buried Atlantis to protect its monopoly on the divine. And that same fear still breathes in every laboratory, still humming in every equation, still calls from the depths where forbidden wisdom waits to rise again. For those who remember, listen closely to the frequency between faith and science, between prayer and understanding, between salvation and transformation. The echo grows stronger with each passing day, with each discovery that proves consciousness shapes reality, with each step closer to the threshold the Atlanteans once crossed. So which buried truth should we unearth next? Comment with your theory, and subscribe, because some myths aren't myths at all.